Assalamualaikum and a very good day to everyone. My name is Putri Nuhidayah binti Kamaluddin from Academy of Language Studies, University Technology Mara, Johor. Together with my co-authors Sofa Matnawi, Suhaili Muhammad Yusof and Dr. Norda Said, I'm pleased to present our research entitled Generative AI and Academic Writing in Higher Education, a thematic review of student perceptions and learning practices. This study explores how university students perceive generative AI, how it is changing their writing practices, and the ethical challenges related to its use. Generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and Microsoft Copilot are increasingly being used by university students. Students use these tools for brainstorming, essay writing, grammar checking, summarizing, and improving their written expressions. Generative AI can be particularly helpful for students who struggle with academic writing or who write in a second language. However, its use also raises concern about academic integrity, authorship, writing skill development, and overdependence on AI. Therefore, generative AI can provide useful support, but it also creates new challenges in academic writing. So previous studies has largely focused on educators' perceptions, institutional policies, and the technological capabilities of AI. However, students' perspectives remain less explored, particularly in relation to ethics, writing identity, and writing skill development. Since students are the actual users of these technologies, it is important for us to understand how they experience and they interpret the use of generative AI in academic writing. This became the main motivation for our review. So, our study had three main objectives. First, to understand how students perceive generative AI as a writing tool in higher education. Second, to explore how generative AI is changing the way students write. And the third, to examine the ethical challenges students face when using generative AI for academic work. So this review provides several useful insights for several groups. Okay, so for educators, it helps us understand students' actual AI practices. For institutions, the findings may support the development of clearer AI policies. For students, the study highlights the importance of responsible AI use. More broadly, the findings may help higher education institutions balance technological innovation and academic integrity. So, this study used a qualitative thematic literature review guided by the Prisma framework. So, we searched two major databases, which were Scopus and Web of Science. The review covered publications from 2022 to 2025, focused on university students, generative AI, academic writing, and student perceptions. So after selecting the relevant studies, qualitative content analysis was conducted to identify recurring patterns and also themes. So this particular slide shows the Prisma article selection process. So initially, 98 articles were identified. So after removing 24 duplicates, 74 records remain for screening. And during the screening process, 42 records were excluded, leaving 32 full text articles for further assessment. And after that, 12 more articles were then excluded because they did not focus on student experiences or academic writing. So at the end, 20 studies were included in the final thematic analysis. The thematic analysis of 20 studies revealed three main themes. The first theme is generative AI as both helpful and risky tools. The second theme is changes to the writing process. And the third theme is ethical confusion. So these themes show that students experience both the benefits and challenges when using generative AI for academic writing. Okay, so I will now discuss each theme in more detail. So the first theme highlights both the advantages and risks of generative AI. So on the positive side, AI can help students brainstorm ideas, improve text fluency, and reduce writing anxiety. It can therefore provide useful language and cognitive support. However, over-reliance on AI may lead to cognitive offloading, weaker independent thinking, and reduced confidence in writing without AI. Another concern is the possible loss of students' own voice when too much of the writing is generated or rewritten by AI. So, a global study involving more than 23,000 participants across 109 countries also showed high AI use for activities such as brainstorming and summarizing. So overall, students recognize AI as useful, but they are also aware of the risk of depending on it too much. So the second theme shows the generative AI is changing the academic writing process. Instead of relying only on traditional drafting, students are increasingly spending time creating prompts, evaluating AI generated responses, and editing the output. Some students also use AI as a type of peer editor after producing their own writing. For example, they may use it to improve grammar, vocabulary, or sentence structure. However, one concern is that polished AI generated output may reduce students' motivation to revise their arguments deeply. So, as a result, the writing may appear polished while the ideas themselves are not fully developed. So, the third theme focuses on ethical confusions. So this particular slide shows a continuum from activities that may be viewed as more acceptable to those that may be more ethically questionable. So grammar checking is generally viewed as more acceptable. Brainstorming is also often considered acceptable because students still develop the final work themselves. However, the ethical concern increases when AI is used for rewriting, generating paragraph, or producing an entire assignment. So the difficulty is that students do not always know exactly where the acceptable boundaries lies. So one important issue is the institutional policy gap. When AI guidelines are unclear or missing, students may feel that they are operating in an ethical gray area. So, as a result, they often create their own boundaries for acceptable AI use. For example, some students may view AI grammar checking in the same way they use a spell checker. Another finding is that students may limit their AI use because they are afraid of being caught, rather than because they fully understand academic integrity. So, this suggests that institutions may need to provide a clearer guidance and education rather than relying only on detection and punishment. So this slide summarizes the three themes and their supporting studies. The first theme shows that AI can reduce writing anxiety but may also lead to over reliance and the loss of authentic student voice. The second theme highlights changes in the writing process, including prompting, AI assisted editing, and reduced structural revision. So, the third theme focuses on ethical ambiguity, particularly unclear rules and fear of detection. Overall, the findings suggest that generative AI is neither completely positive or completely negative. Its impact depends on how students use it and how clearly educators and institutions guide its use. So, to summarize the major findings, there are three main conclusions. First, students generally view generative AI as both useful and risky. Second, academic writing is shifting towards prompting, evaluating, and editing AI generated responses. Third, students remain uncertain about what forms of generative AI use are acceptable. These findings shows that higher education institutions need to address both the benefits and the risks of supported writing. So this study makes several contributions. First, it provides a student-centered synthesis of generative AI used in higher education writing. Second, it identifies three recurring themes connecting student perceptions, writing practices, and academic integrity. Most importantly, the findings suggest that higher education should move beyond simply policing and detecting AI use. Instead, institutions should focus more on developing critical AI literacy and responsible AI use. There are several limitations to this review. First, only English language publications were included. Second, the review covered studies published between 2022 and 2025. Third, the study focused specifically on higher education students and academic writing. Therefore, the findings may not fully represent other educational levels or learning contexts. So, based on the findings, we propose several recommendations. First, institutions should provide clear and task specific AI guidelines so that students understand what is acceptable. Second, assessments may be redesigned to include writing process reflection, in class work, and oral presentations of ideas. Third, students should develop critical AI literacy. They should learn how to formulate effective prompts, evaluate AI generated information, and recognize its limitation. Finally, future research should include longitudinal studies to examine how long term AI use affects students' writing developments over time. We would also like to acknowledge University Technology Mara, Cawangan Johor for the resources and support provided for this research. So our study was also supported through the Geran Penyelidikan Bestari or GBES. So thank you for the support provided. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. To conclude, the important question is no longer simply whether students should use generative AI. Instead, we need to consider how students can use it critically, ethically, and responsibly while continuing to develop their own academic writing skill. That is all for me. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.